here's what I just wanted to kind of start off with you and just explain about. Really, it was really more or less my introduction to you, which happened. It was kind of was sort of by chance because I've talked to Gary Cairns, who you've worked with before, along with Luke Albright. Because so in my conversation with Gary, we talked about the film that him and Luke had worked on together called Monumental, which you had a small little scene in that movie. Where
That's right.
it's funny because I remember when I saw the film for the first time, I recognized your face because I couldn't really put your face from where I've seen it before. It was one of those. It was a situation where I've seen you, but I just couldn't figure out from where. And then later on, as time had passed by, as many times I've seen the film, you always struck me someone that I've seen before. It really wasn't until I had looked into Mark Savage's work where the film Purgatory Road was really the first introduction that I became aware of him, which then led me to some of the other films that he's worked on as well too, specifically Painkiller, Stress to Kill, and then I've also checked out Hitman's Hero, which is a film that he had done back in Australia almost 20 years ago. So with the introduction of the other two films that I mentioned there, that's where I started to become more aware of you. And then when I looked into your filmography, I was like, so then I remember all the various other films you've done in the past that I have come across, but it's been so far in between since I've seen those films in quite some time. So with my conversation with Mark, which who I've had a conversation with last week, where he had talked about his various experiences about making films with the questions that happened to ask him. But one thing that he was really adamant about, I wouldn't say he was, I guess just due to the fact that the film was being put together here, there's a lot of things he didn't want to reveal about the movie, which is the film Killcraft, which to me, from the way he had explained it to me, was one of those films that is considered closest to home for him, where Hitman's Hero and Purgatory Road were the closest film to him, which in terms of like things that he was going through in his life, that he had written the story that more or less kind of inspired by his life, that would then find a way to find a narrative that he could be able to tell with whatever experience he was going at that time. And Killcraft was one of those films that was that movie for him, which you also happen to be in as well. So with my conversation with him, having seen both films, Stress to Kill and then Painkiller, that's where I'll be frank with you, when I became more aware of you as an actor, apart from the various films you've done, which are mostly related to the horror movie genre. But then I came across one movie that just came out rather recently, which was the Man in Room 6, which is a film that came out really not too long ago. I saw that movie, and then that's where I started to, because I listened to various conversations you've had with several people, and it was quite a few you've had. I think I've gone back about like the last 10, 15 years that I could come across to kind of get an overview about where you were at that time in your life and the various films you've done throughout those years that I've been able to catch up with so far at this point. And one of the films that you had talked about at certain points where that was one of the most stressful roles that you took on, that was a very uncomfortable role, but it was a very good role, which is the character you played in the movie Circus of the Deaf, and the character's name escapes me right now. So I have seen that film. And then, of course, I've seen various other films you've done as well, too, within the horror genre. But it really wasn't until Painkiller and Stress to Kill and then The Man in Room 6 where I think that I've noticed the trajectory of terms of what I've been able to see, what you can really pull off some deep stuff in terms of your acting capabilities, that you've taken a lot of in the beginning you talked about how you did 12 years of theater, and then in the last 10 plus years now you've been able to work mainly on film, seldomly maybe on stage, but mostly all through film and in some capacity television as well too. So this is kind of a elongated question to kind of start off with you here, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because when I had listened to you talked about the various things you've done and various things you've gone through throughout your career, from the stage and then to film and then of course television, and then being able to see the various roles you've done along the way as well too, where you talked about, and I'm going to bring up this YouTube channel on Film Courage, where you talked about at certain points where at least at one point I should say, you had felt that you wanted to walk away from the industry because you've come to a point in your life where you had realized that there was a certain part of you that was starting to lose a little bit of yourself, where becoming important and being a caliber actor where people recognize you was more important than the actual art form in itself. And then from that moment on, after you had talked about where you saw a homeless man who was just literally down the road from you, and then walking into a premiere, and within the same vicinity, people have this high caliber way of looking at things. But when you go down the sidewalk, you have a man who was just the polar opposite of that spectrum, if you will, that kind of changed your perspective along the way. And then I started picking up on the various roles you started taking up on here that kind of changed that trajectory about how I started to see where your acting became, I'm not going to say better, but more or less like more, what's the best way I could say it? I'm going to say meaningful, but you definitely had a different approach where a film like The Man in Room 6, I'm not sure if you would have done that back over 10, 15 years ago. If it was a film that had brought to you at that point where maybe your mindset wasn't in line with how you would look at yourself as an actor at this point right now, the way you were looking at yourself back then. Because what I saw in that movie role, along with Stress to Kill and Painkillers, which I think were much more some of your more different roles that I've come across here so far, apart from Circus of the Dead, where really you have some really dark turns when it came to the various characters you play, but those are the ones that really stuck out for me the most, that you really took on some challenging parts of yourself that either were very uncomfortable or not necessarily uncomfortable, but it was a unique challenge for you to take a perspective of a character you normally don't get to play, where Mark and some of the other directors gave the opportunity to play something different that people are accustomed to you seeing in more or less the horror genre here. So again, I apologize for the elongated question, but I'm starting off with that here because that's one of the very first things I've noticed. And I wanted to take my time to speak out and reach out to you because I want to make sure that I got a full grasp, at least as much as I can, to understand where you had started from and where you are with yourself now in terms of your career, but also you as a person. Because if I hadn't heard that conversation from film careers you had over 10 years ago, I don't think I would have made those connections with the various roles you've gotten so far up to this point, especially after learning about how personal the film Killcraft was to Mark Savage, and understanding the little I know about the plot and understanding the approach he was taking with the direction of that movie. It seems like lately a lot of the roles you've been getting as of late have been more or less more complex and a lot more challenging roles in some way or shape or form that, in my opinion, has brought out some of the best that we've seen of you so far up to this point, especially with the film in the Man in Room 6, which is, I think, was a film that, I'll be frank, I've only saw it once, but when I saw it, I wouldn't say I was confused, but it's an epic film that I know, at least for me, would require several viewings again, because there are certain things I just didn't grasp right away, but I got what the ending was, which was unique for me to see how much time was given to make the film 2.5 hours that it was, for you to be able to expand on those areas of acting that I didn't get to see in other areas that you've done before. And that movie kind of help you showcase a different side of your capabilities, if you will, that gave you an opportunity to do something different. That I think if it wasn't for those experiences you mentioned before, who knows if you would have taken on a role of this sort, or even if you had taken on those roles, if you would have had the same approach to it as you did now with it. So my real question now, again, I apologize for the elongated question, is that how you have felt so far up to this point with not necessarily the roles you're getting here, but more about how you have taken the approach with the acting and the various people that have come up to you and asked you on the various roles that they're more or less offering you. Because I'm wondering if they notice how you have handled yourself under the previous roles you've worked on with them before, and they notice something that has changed, where maybe 7 years ago, they noticed you've done better, and then you got better with the next role, and they realized, okay, we can take a bit further now here with you. So I'm wondering if a lot of that has to do with the fact that they have been seeing you do something that has been unique to you and challenging for you, and then trusting that they were able to, in confidence, come up and ask you, hey, we've got another role, but it's going to go down this path here, which is a path you've never taken before. Are you up for it? And having that confidence and to able to have that conversation with you because of those previous experiences they had seen with you before.
Well, thank you. I would add to that list of films, since that experience that you mentioned, DIS.
Yes.
It's a film done in Mexico by directors Adrian Corona. And that one is one that I definitely wouldn't have done years ago. But since I stopped wanting to be an important person, life is much better in every way, and that includes creatively.
Right.
I don't care anymore, Robert. I really don't care.
Right.
And Savage and I connect on that. Neither one of us really give a shit anymore what anybody thinks about our stature in the business. because that stuff is it's poison. It's
Right.
poison to the creative soul. I really mourn the fact that celebrity ever got conflated with filmmaking. I know it's inevitable. I know people love saying who's in it, who's in it, who's in it. But when you live only for who's in it, you're killing an entire universe of people who are trying to create things for you that you're no longer open to because you only want things that you already know, right?
Right.
Uh, so the answer to your question is, I hope, is yes. That the directors I'm working with now, let's see, I'm going to Hungary next year to do a sort of a vampire thing, and that director is very unusual, very artsy. His favorite movie is Shadow of the Vampire, and which I love too. But the kind of artsy thing, I'm gonna do a World War II picture with a great part as a Nazi, but not a stereotypical Nazi. Very deep, deeper than I've done before. Next year, I'm thinking of other things, and the role that Mark gave me in Killcraft as a character named Poe, we decided to make it an homage to Lon Chaney, who was a wounded monster.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes. I hope the answer is, I know it's yes for me, and I hope it's yes for the people that I'm working with. I'm no longer interested in things that I think will advance my career, which sounds like a ridiculous thing to say,
Mm-hmm.
but it became poisonous to me trying to be bigger. And I had to stop, or I could no longer A, be a decent human being, and B, do work that was worthwhile in any way.
Do when you started making those changes for yourself about how you are going to be conducting yourself in terms of how you prioritize what's more important for you, in this case, obviously your well-being, in terms of not picking a project that's going to necessarily take you to the next step, if you will, but take a piece of your soul on the way, just because, for whatever those reasons may be, vanity or whatever the case. But when you started noticing that, when you started making those changes for yourself, was there ever, let's say, for example, like you were given a part that was a standard role that people would know you for, and they more or less expect you to be in, and then and those roles were coming. And then once you started noticing that it's more the same thing, and I'm not saying I'm against it, but I want something more different now. So thank you, but no thank you. And then you started noticing, I'm wondering if, like, because you maybe turned down one role, then several roles stop being offered to you because, well, he's turning down these roles. He also turned on that role. He's no longer interested in that sort of stuff. So what's the point of offering to him? And then you may notice that they might have a dry spell because of that. But even with that being done, though, like I said, I've noticed that the career had changed of the various roles you're taking on, which are, again, much more challenging roles. And I'm wondering that if maybe that dry spell lasted for a short period of time, because you were still making movies, but I'm wondering if there was a certain point in time where you realized that maybe I have to reconsider, not say for vanity reasons, but maybe for financial reasons, where maybe I have to take these parts for now until something else comes up that may be better, that hopefully will grant me more opportunities to take a different path, if you will.
Yeah, but God's been good, and I've been lucky to be able during those periods to live off of residuals when those things happen. And
Mm,
some of it has forced me to return attention back to stage. I've just written a one-man show about Satan.
yeah,
I've been interested in evil for a long time, where it comes from, what it is. And I wouldn't have done that had I had, roll after roll after roll after roll after roll coming in like I did for over a decade. And yeah, absolutely, you're right. When you do turn down the same type of role over and over and over again, word gets around and they find a new boy, so
right,
to speak.
yeah,
But what's important to me now is who's the director as a human being? Can I have a relationship with that human being? What do they want to do? So Adrian Corona, the young director of this film, this in Mexico, he said, there are two kinds of creatives. There are people who do this to get attention, and there are people who do this to relieve tension. And the second type is the type I want to work with, because those are people who have to do it. They have to do it. And what they have to do is not to become famous, but to get something out of their soul out into the world. They have to do it. And I feel the same way. And now the kind of stuff that by the grace of God, I'm able to do, it's not as high profile stuff, but it's getting what I want to leave in the world before I'm dust out there. And I think that's a really important part of a person's life, is to decide, I am going to die. I will not be here. I can take nothing with me. What can I leave behind?
When you started going through that process and making those changes for you, have you looked back on the roles you've taken on that, let's say, for example, you took them on for transaction reasons, for the opportunities, the financial reasons, and then, and if when you look at those, I'm not sure if you go back and revisit your roles. I'm assuming you probably don't, only because you're busy. But if the opportunity were ever to arise where you may look at something that you've done a number of years ago and watch back at some of those things you've done and maybe realize maybe the experience at the time, not saying that the production was terrible for you, but the experience of what you were going through that time and how you were conducting yourself and why you selected the role, for whether financial or for market reasons or whatever the case may be. But when you look at the role and you realize that, okay, so I'm curious about if even at that time, if you were confident in knowing that I'm still going to do the job, I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, or was it more in a sense like, I got a job, it's easy, I'm going to do it, therefore I know I'm going to do it well because it's not that hard, I've done this a million times, so therefore I know the gist of it. But if you look back at the role and you look at how you conduct yourself given the role that you were looking at, or thinking about the experience, do you think about the end product of like, okay, well, I know what I went through, but I'm seeing the performance right now, it wasn't that bad. I remember thinking it was easy, but really that actually turned out to be a much better than I remember from what I see, how I believe I performed. But now that I'm looking at it, therefore I think I've actually did a pretty good job, despite what I was thinking at that time of myself or of the situation. Or maybe the opposite, where you look and you realize that was never the best of my ability. Yes, I took that role for granted. I took the production for granted, and I could see that my performance was not up to par. But because of what I went through, therefore I know I'm able to do better now because of the changes that I've made.
Both are true.
Okay.
I hear from people who like movies, and they're really into movies that I thought, wow, it was really a mistake to do. And then, on the other hand, the movies that I thought, oh, this could be the one. You're always looking for the one. That's the LA disease, is looking for the one. It's a cancer, and that you put everything into it. But what I was really putting into it was my hopes of being important and of reaching that higher level. And so the performance sucks. And I thought it was great at the time, but it wasn't great. And But I don't watch my stuff.
Okay.
But I'm aware of what people think of it, and sometime a clip will come up and I'll go, no, I don't ever want to see that again.
But do you feel that way about your work now?
No.
Whether okay, so I'm going to use Painkiller as a big example for you, because that was a film that I think a lot of people, because I've come across quite a few interviews where people were actually pointing out, like, this is a role that you're not used to, that you're not usually playing. You're playing something that's more or less the everyday man with a purpose, if you will. And Mark, obviously, and Tom Parnell in the writing as well too, gave you an opportunity to expand on some of the acting muscles that most people are really associated with you with, in terms of what you would normally be doing there. So for me, that movie was kind of like, I would suggest it was probably the turning point where if people like what you do in the horror genre and they got to see you in more or less kind of like I don't know if this is considered a thriller, but revenge type of genre, if you will, they got to see something a little bit more, have a little more humanity you are able to offer than what you probably would normally be given an opportunity to do so here. So have you noticed that a lot more people looked at you differently because of those respective roles in Stress to Kill and also in Painkiller when they realized that, I love you in these genres, but this movie was awesome. So I'm wondering if anything had changed along the way because of those films moving forward from there.
I get good response from that. And now an early version of this, back when I was still in the I want to be a movie star phase, was Criminal Minds.
Oh yeah,
I got a
okay.
little recurring on that, and that character was written as an homage to the Wounded Monsters that Lon Chaney played. And my makeup artist, Christopher Allen Nelson, he was Tarantino's makeup artist on all the Kill Bill stuff. He played the groom in the first movie, and he was very into Chaney. And so we together made that character an homage to the sort of Wounded Monsters. And that was something that at the time I had not. I was just kill, slice, slice, hack, hack, whisper, stare, America's Next Boogeyman, that kind of stuff. But that character was a chance to be gentle and hurt and wounded, but at the same time malevolent. And that's the combination I really like. And so the character in Mark's films are like that. The character in Stress to Kill was like that. And then in the sequel, the character was like that in Painkiller. He's wounded.
Yeah.
You can easily see why he's doing what he's doing, but it ain't good stuff that he's doing.
Yeah.
And is he really helping anything by killing people who are only peripherally involved with the pharmaceutical industry in an effort to assuage himself of the guilt of his daughter's death, for whom he is rather directly responsible because of what happened to their mother in the previous film?
Yeah.
So, all of that, up until that, I only gotten to do that in the Criminal Minds role. But yes, all of the characters that I play now, I want them to have all of the levels that you and I have.
Well, it's funny because when I saw, so I'm going to bring two films in. I talked about briefly Circus of the Dead because that was a film that you had talked about before, that specific role was very hard for you because that's it's a very dark character. For those who are not aware, that you pretty much play a leader of a clown gang, if you will. But the things that your character does in that movie, there's really no explanation as far as why the character is the way that they are, other than the fact that
Right.
we accept it on face value that they're just flat out evil. And I think a lot of it, what worked for me about your character was that no explanation was really needed for that because you didn't want to know too much about them because you find what they were doing very vile and very disgusting. So there's no reason for you to want to delve into that rabbit hole, if you will. But when you look at a role, like say, for example, the man in Room 6, that one to me was a very unique one for me personally in how I looked at you as an actor, because it was the first time that I was aware of what you were playing a character in prosthetics. But at the same time, there was something about the story that also had added a perspective of the character that you look at him in one way in the first half of the film, and then the second half, which I won't reveal here, but that was the part where I was starting to realize if I fully understood what was going on, which is why I have to go back and watch it again. But when you watch the movie, for anyone who's not aware of it, I'm hoping they'll understand what I mean by that when they do check it out, because there's something about your performance in that particular film that I was not prepared to see that how you would handle, at least in this case, with the performance that I got out of that, what you gave in that particular film there, because it's not a very typical role for you, but it was a unique one because it was an amalgamation of all the things that I've seen you do so far that you got to do with this character, where you have the various emotional wavelengths that you have with Painkiller and Stress to Kill, and also with Circus of the Dead. I'm trying to think what else too. Even to some degree, there was a movie that I happened to saw rather recently that you worked with Kane on. The Good Things the Devils Do.
Good Things Devils Do.
Yeah, so I saw that too. So there's like all the roles I've seen so far that I've come across with you up to this point. To me, that role had a bit of all of that, but it was more through the body language than it was through your words, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I hate words.
Right. Well, that's why I found that role to be rather unique for you, because it was interesting to see you deliver the performance through your body language rather than your words.
Yes. I love to bring my body to my work.
Right.
And the best scenes that I've ever had, I think, with the camera are just, this sounds narcissistic, but it's really not, Robert.
Mm.
Me alone with the camera and no words.
Right.
Because, yeah, there's a relationship to the lens that you can have between the human body and the lens that sometimes words can get in the way of it. I don't know. It's like a married couple at dinner. If you're in the restaurant, you can tell what the state of their relationship is,
Yeah.
just by the body language. It's just like that. And Trevor Yinger, who did Man in Room 6, gave me the opportunity to do that. We did an art house film together back in 2013 or so, I think, called Coyote, which had a lot of similar elements, a lot of nonverbal, a lot of weird uses of the body in it. Very art house.
I wanted to ask you about something that you had said, because people have asked you before about your work with, I'm going to name two people here, Rob Zombie and Jamie Lee Curtis, where you've worked with them. You worked with Jamie on Scream Queens, and then, of course, Rob on Three from Hell. The reason I'm bringing this up here is because the roles you had in each of the respective film and show, they were specifically looking out for you. They say, hey, we like you for this part. If I recall correctly, that's what your agent had told you at the time.
Yeah.
And they had a specific role in mind. For Three from Hell was a very small role, more or less a cameo, if you will. Whereas in Screen Queens, it was not necessarily the same idea, but they saw something you had done before in the past that they wanted you to do what you've done in the horror genre, more or less in that particular show, to keep consistent
That's
with
right.
the theme of the show. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because earlier I was bringing up the fact that how you had made some changes in your life to go about your artistic endeavor and pursuing this field in the entertainment business, where you decided you want to focus on other areas that had more meaningful purpose for you, rather than, does it pay me more than the last gig? It's more had a real purpose for why you want to pursue the role rather than for transactional reasons, which I know is important, but you started to realize what was more important for you at that point. But under those circumstances, though, when you have directors, in this case, what Jamie Lee Curtis meant to say, and Rob Zombie, when they're coming in and talking to your agents and saying, hey, we want your client to partake in this part here. It's not a big one. It's a little part, but they get to be in the movie that we are directing, more or less, or the show that we're directing. Under those circumstances, though, did you still have that same thought process that, hey, this is an opportunity for me to work with these respective filmmakers and respective people in the industry? Or was it purely like, you know what, I get to work with these guys whose work I do admire and I respect their career. And yes, I want to work with them just to be able to see what they do differently in that level, so I can see how I could, I'm not sure if you're looking at more from perspective like how you could see how they go about it. And then maybe one day, if the opportunity arises where we loved working with you on the set for this one particular production we worked on here, we want to consider for another role down the line. But this time around, it's more or less the same scenario, but this has much more substance because we know what you did last time around, because we happen to see another movie that you did, we loved. So I'm wondering if you have a little bit of a different thought process about how you go about that particular decision making. Because to me, at the time when they asked you about this question here, that it was more like, yes, Jamie Lee Curtis and Rob Zombie, of course I'm going to say yes, but I'm truly wondering if that's really the reason why you did it, because of the changes you were going through that time to make those decisions under those circumstances.
That's a very good question. And had either one of those happened pre the change, guy sleeping on the cardboard, my sort of existential crisis about celebrity, if it had happened before that, then I would have been freaking out about the size of the role and, what does it mean? And probably approached them with a lot more arrogance. Because they happened afterwards. It was just as you say. It was just like, okay, these people are very accomplished in the field, and I want to see what they do, and I want to be a servant. That has become my the way that I approach my work now is, how can I serve? I want to serve the audience. I want to serve the producers. I want to serve the directors. I want to serve the department heads of everybody. I really enjoy that. I like being a servant.
Okay.
Um, it's been a strong part of my personality always. So yeah. So when I was in set with Jamie Lee Curtis, she said, "I really really love what you did in your audition, and let's do that and see how it goes." And so we did it, and she was laughing. She like blew two takes because she was laughing because it was this really slow kind of a slow burn feature type of way we played the scene. Then they always have somebody from network who's observing the shoots because there's so much money at stake.
Yeah.
And she came back to me, and I had my very certain way that I was playing the character, and I knew this would get a good reaction on screen. So did she. And then she came back and she said, "Hey, network says they're going to cut the scene if we don't cut the running time. So we got to lop off close to half of the time. We got to kick it up. I'm sorry. I really like that approach too, but we got to go faster." And and then it was like, okay, and go. So had that happened before, I would have been like, damn it, this was
Mhm.
my opportunity, and I know how this would play on screen, and now you're messing me up. But because I really was just interested at that time in the relationship that I had with her, I just wanted to please her, and I wanted to make her life easier with the network, and I wanted to make her happy. And so that's the way we did the scene. Um, and it was the same thing with Rob Zombie. I talked to him about the goats, the organic goats that he and his wife raise, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And yeah, it just Rob, it just feels different when you are not consumed by how important am I and what list am I on. I just can't tell you the freedom that comes from letting all of that shit go.
Right. What so when you have for example, when you working with Mark, I'll be frank, to me, because I haven't seen all your films, because you've done quite a few, but from what I'm gathering here, I'm gonna I'm making the impression that I'm getting is that when you started working with Mark Savage, that that's where more or less the type of roles that you would be getting beforehand had changed a great deal, because Mark had said before that one of the things that you guys have a big thing in common with each other is that you guys both love the circus freaks aspect of of that particular field. And in fact, one of the things he's
Right.
trying to work on with you is a film called Circus of Dread, I believe is what it's called.
Ooh,
Uh,
thank you for mentioning Circus of Dread.
yes.
Yes,
So
yes.
because that's a film that he says is he didn't explain the whole story, but he gave me a good chunk of it in our conversation. But in the conversation we were having, it's more in line with what I think is his bread and butter about complexities of a person, and whether you set them or not, but you understand why they're doing what they're doing, especially as the story progresses along the way when you find out the overall picture. But the point I'm getting at is with Mark is that, to me, Mark, it was basically the man that more or less kind of gave you the opportunity to try something that you were not known for. And because you were able to show what you're really capable of pulling off here, it seems like everything had changed along the way after those said films in Stress to Kill and Painkillers. Because when I look at a movie like, for example, like The Man in Room Six, I'm wondering if it hadn't been for Mark's confidence in yourself and giving you the opportunity to try these roles and the character ability you play in both those movies, that would Man from Six ever happen because of those movies? I mean, I'm not saying it's a direct result of the films, but I'm wondering if that the trajectory would have changed because of those films. So I'm wondering if you have the same kind of mindset where you believe that if it wasn't for Mark in trusting you in doing what you do best in this particular case here, do you think that would have changed for you along the way too if it wasn't for those opportunities?
I know that it's really helped me. Mark Savage, Adrian Corona, Trevor Yinger are three of my favorite directors, and all three of them have trusted me,
Okay.
and I've trusted them. Uh, Mark won't let you lie, and that's really really good for me because I'm a pretty good liar. You have to be if you
Okay.
operate in any way, even on the periphery of the celebrity world. You have to be able to bullshit. and Mark won't let you do it. So yeah, if it's not truthful, Mark won't accept it, and I really, really respect that about him.
Do you do you feel like as time has gone by, I'm curious about, let's say one day if you were to stop getting offers for whatever those reasons may be it that, hey, we've the movies aren't selling like they were before, or you're no longer in demand, and you're not able to pursue acting in for you to sustain a living, if you will. But I'm wondering if that were to happen, is that a concern for you? Because you know that even if I'm not going to be able to get paid to do this anymore, I'm still going to do it because I love it. Or is there a part of you that feels like, because I love doing this here, I still want to get paid for this? I'm wondering if you have a if there's a if you're prepared to deal with the consequences of something like that were to happen. Because the reason why I'm bringing this up here is because the one thing I've noticed about a lot of people who are very passionate about what they do, they'll do it no matter what. But I really wonder at times if the opportunity will be stripped from them, where you're no longer going to make a living anymore, because this is your bread and butter. You do this for a living. But if it's taken away from you in terms of you making money, I don't think the passion will die, but I'm wondering if the motivation will die for you, because this has always been what you've been doing the last, I would say, 20 plus years at this point, where this is all you have been doing. Now for you to go into more or less the real world, in that sense, where you have to find a job because you can't make a living off of that here. Do you think something about yourself would change if that were to occur? Or are you comfortable with yourself knowing that I've done what I've done, I've lived my life, and I've done all the things I want to do in terms of my acting? Because if it wasn't for these directors and these writers giving me the opportunity, I would have never done these films like Stress to Kill, this, or The Man from in Room 6, and so on and so forth, where I've been able to act out my flex out these acting muscles, if you will. So yes, I feel confident in saying that it's okay, I can walk away from it. Or is there a little part of that you feel will die inside because you are no longer to be able to make a living off of that, because now the opportunities have been taken away from you?
Well, and some of that goes back to, do you view yourself as a product or not?
Right.
And if you're in the celebrity mindset and you view yourself as a product, it's absolute death when you're no longer in demand. I've been to auditions and sat beside people who were regulars on TV series. I mean, like well-known people, and they're reading for the same part I have because, the demand falls away.
Right.
But if I were to get no more offers, and I'll be honest with you, I do work on offers. I haven't auditioned in a long time. I mean, audition in the way of like combing through roles. Things come to me through my agent or my manager or myself. But if all of that stopped, I would continue to do it, and I would continue to find a way to make a living doing it, because this is what I do and it's all I know. And I guess maybe that's one of the reasons that I've gone back to stage, as a hedge against that happening, because I made my living on touring stage for 14 years before I did movies, which I've now been doing for 14 years. So yeah, I'd go back to stage, and eventually I'm going to be too old and broken down to do this anyway. So, I will always find, until I'm just too damn infirm to do it, I'll always find a way to make a living doing it.
What's the one thing that you notice has changed for you about yourself? I'm going to say in the last 5 years that you have noticed about yourself that you probably, like, so for example, like you talked before, you mentioned just now that the idea of someone who cares about celebrityism, if you will, and the fact that they're no longer being in demand or no longer being offered roles, that's the death of their career, that's a priority for them, because otherwise they can't sustain themselves. But when you started, as you've gone through those changes throughout your career and the various people you worked with, and I'm sure there's some of the things along the way that you have never mentioned before that you have figured out about yourself when you realize that, I think I'm a much better person now because of this experience, whether it be because you've made those changes and then you learn something else about yourself after the fact, that if it wasn't for those changes you've made, that you probably wouldn't have the patience to deal with those set changes that other in other areas that you were probably never exposed to about yourself, that you realize that has helped you become a much stronger person, a much better person in some capacity, in other areas where you probably lacked the strength to have to deal with, where before you didn't have to. Now that you are having to, you are more better prepared for it. So I guess the question I'm trying to ask is like how you feel you have gotten better in areas that you thought you realized that you were not prepared for, but because you have matured, you can handle yourself better and conduct yourself better in that way because of the years of turmoil you've dealt with and how you handle those turmoil better now as opposed to what you did before. So I hope that's not a confusing question for me to ask, but I hope you understand where I'm coming from with that.
I think I do.
Okay.
I've learned that it's not the end of the world. You know, nothing's the end of the world. But when you're poised on this little brink of, I got to be important, this is so important to my career. This is so important to my career. Then everything becomes the end of the world. And it's really wearying. And it's so freeing and liberating to be able to make mistakes and to realize all the mistakes that I've made. I've been a horrible person to other people at many points in my life. And I have to watch and guard against that. I'm much more diligent now. I think a lot less of my abilities to, on my own and in my own strength, be a good person, quote unquote. I'm not a good person without, in my own personal faith, without the help of God, without the inspiration of Christ. I am not a good person. I truly believe that I am prone to very, very easily fall right back into selfishness and infidelity and arrogance and all the traps that I've fallen into so many times since I started doing this. And so every morning I have to, I don't want to get too religious here, but it's the answer to the question. I have to lay it down before the cross. I have to prostrate myself literally and say, I can't do this. I can't do this without you. And that's something that I never would have done in those years of trying to be important, because then I was like, I can do this. I can do this. I can do this. And now my opinion of myself is far diminished. There's not much that I can do. What I can do is be kind to other people, treat them as I'd want to be treated, be open to all opportunities, and do my best. That's what I can do.
I got a question about that here because this is actually really interesting because I know you talked about your faith before, but what I'm actually curious about from your perspective on that is because I'm wondering if you have received some criticism. I haven't seen anything online as far as I'm aware of here that people, let's say, of the same faith as yourself in various denominations, but if they were to come up to you and say, you're a man of Christ, you have faith in God, but why do you do these horror films? Why are you doing? I mean, there's a movie you've done called Circus of the Dead where I heard that the role is absolutely horrible. It's a terrible person you're playing. Mm-hmm. I've seen the movie, and the character you play in that film is disgusting in terms of like what they do.
Yeah.
But you did great in the film, but I'm sure if a person who has a certain view about how people should conduct themselves, being a man of faith, a person of faith rather, and make a film of that sort, have you ever come across criticism from people in that particular field, in that particular point of view, that say, "Hey, why are you doing this here? And if you're doing that, and you're calling yourself as a man of God, why are you playing a character of this sort that is so deplorable, and yet you call yourself a man of God, if you will?"
All the time,
okay.
All the time. And I give no answer. I owe no answer. I used to think I owed an answer. I don't know any answer. My relationship's not with them. A person's relationship with God is the most private, the deepest relationship that any human being can have. You don't have to explain yourself to anybody, and nobody has the right to ask you to explain yourself. They do, but you don't have to give them an answer. What they think doesn't matter. You just have to know that you're right with your higher power.
Do you struggle with that though? Sometimes, like for example, like the part you played in the Circus of the Dead, that character you played, was that something you? I think you talked about it before in the past, where you even had to have the director kind of more or less hold your hand throughout that process, because that's such a very dark character that you play, that you needed
Yeah.
some sort of assistance in that capacity to be able to, for you to be able to go through that production. Because
Yes.
for anyone who hasn't seen the film, the things that your character does in that film, it's like I said before, it's disgusting. There's some really sick stuff in that respect there. But in terms of a horror film, it's a great character. But when you're looking at a part like that, I'm wondering if you ever really get conflicted of like, it's a good role, but a man from my position right now, I don't know if I would want to cross that line to play a character of that sort. So I'm wondering what the decision process is like. And you don't have to delve into it if you don't want to, but I'm wondering if it's something that you pray about, or you know the answer, but it's just really figuring out the best way to approach it before you say yes or no to it. So I'm wondering what that thought process is like for yourself before you commit and make a decision to follow through with it or not.
And here's where if you follow any type of religion or have any thought, I mean, there's the point of view that we're just strictly physiological beings, that everything is in our physiology. And if you hold that point of view, then what I'm about to say may sound crazy, but I call it a check in your spirit. And this is not particular to any particular religion. It's listening and feeling, is this right or wrong? Not intellectualizing it, but just feeling it. Is this right or wrong? And sometimes everything says, yeah, this is right. And the doors keep opening. And you're like, I don't really know why these doors are opening. You should go through this door. You should go through this door. You should go through this door. So I go through the door. But if you intellectualize it and you do pros and cons checklists, then you're screwing up that little tiny Zephyr voice, that little nudge. So what I've decided for me is that the reason, I mean, I get these roles because of my face. I mean, look at me, but also because I've always been very interested in evil and what it is. I don't like evil to be a joke. I think it's very real. And so maybe I've been given the opportunity to play it, to make it so damn real, a character like you're talking about in Circus of the Dead, that people would shudder that a human being could do these things. And that maybe somewhere in the back of their mind, they would think, by God, I could do these things too. Because the character I'm watching is a human being.
Mm.
And maybe that's my calling, so to speak. And that's why these roles keep coming up. But yeah, each time, to say that I pray about it makes it sound like, ah, and it's not like that. It's more like, okay, what, what's going on? Why is this door opening? And then shutting up. And just shutting up and living with the answer. And sometimes the answer is no, and I really, really, really want it to be yes. But if it's no, I ain't doing it. That sounds crazy, I know. And for anybody who's watching this or listening to this who thinks that there's no such thing as a soul, and maybe even no such thing as consciousness, maybe it's all an illusion of our physiology. I know that sounds crazy, and I wish I could make it sound less crazy, but I can't.
Mm.
If you don't view the world as anything but material, I can't make the way that I view the world sound anything but nuts to you. I can't convince you.
So, and this is the part that I'm actually curious about yourself when it comes to that decision-making process, and especially for a character like in Circus of the Dead, where it's a very, you're very conflicted with the character, because even when you took on the role, you still will not, I'm not gonna say you weren't happy with it, but that's not the best way to describe it. you weren't comfortable with the character because
Oh, it's a great way to describe it. Yeah,
uh,
I knew I was supposed to do it, and I respected the hell out of Billy Pond, the director. But
mhm.
no, I was never comfortable. It was a hard shoot.
So when you do that, I'm wondering if you ever at a certain point realized maybe you thought, I don't think I should have ever done this part because this is getting a lot worse. Because as the story progresses, it gets worse and worse and worse because the acts become more violent and more disgusting and more deplorable to the point where, I remember at one point I was thinking like, how can these guys continue doing what they're doing and no one's able to stop it? Because I really was hoping that there would be someone that would just put an end to it all, and that's not the case.
And that's why it's so disturbing to me,
Right,
because the worldview of the film and of my character in the film is bad things happen at any time for any reason,
right,
and you can't stop them. That's really scary to me. That's why it
right.
was so disturbing. But in answer to your question, again, you listen. There was one scene in there that I would not take part in. One, and I think one of the other clowns would not too. It involved a an unborn child,
Oh, I think I know
and
what you're talking about. Never heard
yeah,
about that.
I said, Billy, I can't. I'm hearing a no. I can't. That was an improvised scene. We didn't know it was coming up. And so he said, okay, that's cool. He was totally fine with it. But that's the one. So yeah, you listen. And if it ever gets to that point, you say, yeah, no.
What would have happened if Bill had said, we're gonna do it. You need to do this. And I'm not gonna take no for an answer because it's as important. We need this scene because you've gotten this far. And this is gonna help push the film to its limits. And it's very important that we have this scene in the film. Otherwise it won't work.
The old Bill would say, sir, yes, sir, of course, sir. The new Bill, I hope, would say, Billy, I can't, man. I give a lot to you, but I can't give this. But yeah, that I've never had that question. That's a fair question because it's never happened.
Mm.
It's never happened, you know.
Do you ever feel like you're gonna come to a point where someone is going to ask you to play a character that you are really interested in playing, not necessarily in the same vein as the character you played in Circus of the Dead, but something to the extent of like you're going to some darker boundaries and other areas that you're just going to do some things that are going to be disgusting, and not necessarily disgusting in terms of violence, but maybe in terms of psychological
Yeah,
abuse or whatever the case may be,
yeah,
where you realize that, okay, this is going too far for me. Like, it's one thing for me to be taking on a challenging role, but right now I feel like it's going too far because if this is how they see me in doing roles like this based off of that role, which they, I understand where they're coming from that point of view, but I don't want to go down that path because that's a path that I don't want to revisit again, or not necessarily revisit, but revisit going down that rabbit hole. So I'm wondering
yeah.
if you have a limitation about how far you're willing to go in various dark fields, if you will, when it comes to the abusive side of human nature, physically, spiritual, whatever the case may be. If you have a limitation,
Yes, I've said no
okay,
before and would say no again. But the no's usually were not because the character was doing some physical thing or some psychological thing that I thought was just terrible. The no's were because I thought that the character was not being honest, that it was a lie, that it was somebody who just thought, hey, I'll create this character who does these reprehensible things because people really like to see reprehensible things and they will make a lot of money. I don't want to be a part of that. But if I can find my way into the woundedness, if I can see the wounds, yeah, I'm all in. Because that's what we are. We are wounded monsters.
right.
And if we don't recognize that we're wounded monsters, we're going to do monstrous things to one another.
So you're willing to take on a role, from what I'm understanding here. If a character they're offering you, it's a good part, and you're going to do some really nasty stuff, but there's a complexity with the character where there's some humanity because you understand where the character's background is coming from to lead
Yes.
up to this point. But the path that this character takes is let's say it's even more darker than you did with the role in Circus of the Dead, but you have some substance where
Yes.
we get it, but even in that capacity, going as far as we're going, which is going really far, you're willing to take that leap to be able to do that, so long as there's a reason for that. Even if it's something you know for a fact, I would never say no yes to a role of this sort because this had no substance, but this one does have substance, so I'm making the exception to the rule under those
Of course,
circumstances. Okay.
I would have to. I would have no choice. I would have no integrity as an artist if I didn't, because
Okay.
that's my passion in life, is to portray the wounded monsters and to constantly try to get across this idea that, guys, there are no good people and bad people. That is a lie.
Mm.
There's us. There's only us. And every time that we create hierarchies of human beings, and moral hierarchies, especially good people and bad people, and I could never be this. Yes, you could. You damn well could. Anything that any other human being does, you are capable of, baby. Face it. Face it. You can't drink it away. You can't screw it away. You can't smoke it away with cigars. You can't eat it away with fine meals. Face it. Face what you are. And I mean me too, as human beings, face our great potential for deeply dark and destructive behavior. I want to lead ultimately to the light, but it seems to be my calling to do it by going through the dark. I have to do it. And if it's truthful, yeah, of course, I've got to do it.
Do you ever feel like this is so you're really in a unique position for me to ask this, because it sounds like to me that as much as of an epiphany you've had in the last 10 plus years where you've made some changes in your life, I'm wondering if, even though you've met some good people along the way that have given you opportunity to express yourself in various ways in terms of your acting capabilities, but there's still a part of me that wonders if this path that you take here, because everyone I've talked to and when it comes to acting, directing, whatever the case may be, especially in this particular field, it's a very lonely path. But I'm wondering for yourself specifically, because of the roles that you're mostly known for, do you ever feel that loneliness really sink in where you like, this is something that a person, because you talked about the way you look, because you have a certain look that fits a character of that sort who is that, you can't look at Brad Pitt and say that's a rapist right there. You see what I'm saying?
But,
right,
but it has actually happened to me before, where I've gone into an audition back in the days before everything was online, and people say, "Oh, you're here for the rapist, right? It's right down there." That's actually happened. So yeah, I know. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no. I'm glad you pointed that out too, because what I'm trying to say is that because of the stigma that you have, what the roles you're getting because of your look, I'm wondering if it's a very lonely path, because things have changed for you along the way, in terms of the roles you have been getting so far, where you're not playing Circus of Dead type characters, but you're actually playing more humanistic roles where guys are very complex. They're doing some questionable things, but you get what they're coming, and it's very much grounded in reality, where there's no supernatural element to it. There's none of that other heightened reality. I mean, there is heightened reality, but it's not heightened reality in terms of like the horror sense, if you will. But there's some sort of ground level. There's some middle ground that I feel like that I think, and you let me know if I'm wrong, where if it wasn't for those roles that say that Mark and all the other directors that you've talked about before have given you to try something different, keeping you grounded, keeping you level-headed in terms of like trying something different, I'm wondering if you probably would have been more difficult to handle yourself on a day-to-day basis, that I'm getting offered these roles. Is this how my life is going to be like for the rest of my days? Because I know I'm not these guys, but that's how the world sees me so far, and these are the roles that I'm getting. This sucks. And because I'm getting these roles, I'm grateful I've got jobs, but I don't want to be known just for this. But when Mark says, hey, I want to give you a role of a part of this guy who, listen, he's going to kill people because it lowers his blood pressure, but there's a reason for that. And there's also humanity you can offer to this character too, to have a side with him, whether we agree with him or not, but we get him. And then you do that again with Painkiller. and you got a role like the man from Room 6, which is a very dark, complex role, but not in the sense where I think people are accustomed to. So you have an opportunity to expand on those little areas where people are like, hey, this guy is actually really good at other things. Circus of the Dead, well, yeah, he's great, but man, you got to see Painkiller. That's something that's different that we've never seen before. He's amazing. Because that's the impression that I got from a lot of people who've seen the films, myself included. But if it wasn't for those opportunities there, do you think you probably would have had the same thought process behind the way you look at things now if it wasn't for those opportunities as well?
No, and this is why actors fall into addictive and destructive behaviors. People don't understand it because they think, oh, you just playing. But yes, when you are seen a certain way by the world over and over and over and over and over again, um, it does play with your head, especially if your public persona, has to match in some ways the characters that you're playing. You really can lose yourself.
Right.
So yeah, it would have been a very unhappy if after the Emmy happened and after Criminal Minds happened, if I'd gotten a series gig and going on and on and on, but playing those same type of reductive characters, I'd probably be a lot richer and I'd probably be a lot sadder. I think some sorrow and some sadness is really important. I don't think you can find yourself in happiness and in excess. You can only find yourself sort of in the fires of sorrow, but you don't want to be,
Yeah.
sorrowful all the time. And I know people who are typecast as my kind of role, but also people who are typecast as bubbly, happy people. I know comedians who are extremely depressed and sad to be around. Because you can't live a lie but so long without it becoming a part of you, and then you feel like you're the lie. So then you got to do either one or two things. You either got to become the lie, or you've got to divorce yourself so much from your work that your work becomes not good because you're just phoning it in.
So I got a question about, because you worked with Kane before on more than one occasion, and the reason I'm bringing him up is because I've heard him talk many times in the past how, for those who don't know, he had a pretty rough story with, the fire that he had gone through in a photo shoot that changed him in a lot of ways too. But that particular experience had changed a lot about himself, how he conducts himself, how he handles himself, especially under stressful situations. Like, so the reason I'm bringing it up in specific is because for the movie you guys had did together called I keep messing up
Good
the name
things devils do.
The Good Things Devils Do. Yes. In that film, your character is pretty much an everyday guy trying to do the right thing, messed up past, and with the daughter and all. But Kane's character, on the other hand, that guy is a complete, utterly disgusting person for what he does, and he does a really good job in playing that kind of a character, right, in that film. But when you're around someone like him, worked with him more than one occasion, is there anything that you can recall from your experience working with him that may have helped you along the way? Like, if Kane can do this, and because he sounds to me someone who's very level-headed about himself, he knows who he is and doesn't care what people think about him, because that's the impression that I get from listening to him talk. But when you work with him, I'm wondering if not just with him only, but in various other people you've worked with, that you realize, how they've conducted themselves and being typecast as who they are, and yet they've been able to keep themselves even keel. I'm wondering if there's something along the way that you would have learned a lot more about yourself, and maybe you realize, let me try this thing first and see how
Yes,
that works for me. So I'm curious about that for yourself.
absolutely. Kane Hodder, Bill Moseley, Hugh Jackman, um, Robert Loggia, go on and on, Adrienne Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis, all of these people, I have learned poise from all of them. And I only know them on set, of course, but
Mm-hmm.
On set, outside of the frame, and people who watch don't think about this a lot, but outside of the frame, you've got a lot of people all around you, and they all have responsibilities. And for the moment of the take, you are the center of whether they succeed or fail in those responsibilities. And so how you deal with them really matters. But I've seen all of these people that I've mentioned under great stress, still manage to be kind. And that's something I've learned because I'm not naturally kind. I'm naturally very selfish, given to snap. And I've learned, I hope, how to be kind under all circumstances. Kane's really good about this because he's asked to do a lot of heavy physical stuff, fight scenes.
Yeah.
They think, they always want Kane to be the badass. And sometimes they're asking him to do things that are difficult to do and the shot's not right. But he always finds the way to respect the person while still essentially saying, you need to do this a different way and trust me. He's always kind. And yeah, I have tried to learn that.
What's your experience with working with Mark, especially the first time once you and him had clicked and you found out a lot of things you guys have in common with each other, and then work on more than one project together? Because when I talked with him, he tells me that he's kind of I'm sure he's joking, but I understand what he means by it when he says, I'm kind of a psychotic person in the sense that I obsess with something in this field that it's like an addiction for me. But he has an even keel about himself that I'm sure he's learned along the way to balance that out for himself. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, in your relationship working with him, because I'll be frank with you, I think some of your best roles have come from his movies, where he saw something in you, you saw something in him, and you guys were able to click like that and bring the best out of each other. So when you started working with him for the first time, and then the second, third, and fourth time, working on from one project to the next, and I'm sure you guys have a relationship in terms of a friendship outside of productions here. I'm wondering if anything along the way that you have figured out by working with him, being around him, that helped you change or look at yourself a certain way, that you may realize that because Mark has given me these parts, I can actually do this now. So I feel confident that I can pull off a role of this sort that he's given me here. And I thought I could do it, but now I realize that I am doing it. I'm more than capable of doing it. So I'm kind of getting the impression that's kind of what you've experienced in working with him, because you've been able to do something different from what you've done on numerous occasions in the horror genre, where in this film you worked with him, not necessarily horror, but different in terms of the side of humanity that you normally aren't able to do on a frequent basis here. But him giving you that opportunity, I'm wondering if you've learned a lot about yourself and work with him, being friends with him, that has helped you look at yourself differently because of that experience with him.
Yeah, Mark and I are both really into the old way that monsters used to be portrayed, going back to the Universal films. Mm-hmm. Those actors at their best, all the way back to Chaney Sr., were showing you the human being as well. And Mark is really kind to me because he knows that I revere these people. I had a shot in Killcraft where I was dragging a shovel toward a grave, and behind me, backlit, is this church with fog all around it. And my character is kind of deformed anyway, and so I'm dragging one foot and dragging this shovel. And afterwards, he says, "Call off, absolutely call off," because he knows what that does for me, to even being thought of in the room with those people. It's not a matter of, oh, you're as big as Karloff. It's that there's something of the same approach to monsters and humanity mixed together. And you have that, Bill. That's what Mark says to me when he does things like that. And it makes me think, yeah, maybe I do. Maybe I do. And so I can do more of it. And I guess that's what friends do for each other, is like, the best part of your friend and what they secretly want so much to be. And so as a good friend, you tell them you already are that. You already are that. You just have to bring it out. And, Mark's a really good friend in that way.
I've been fortunate enough to be able to talk to various people in some way or shape or form. I talk to one person, would then lead me to another person, not necessarily directly as in like, you should talk to this person, but it's more about like, I've seen Mark's work, seeing the other stuff he's done. I'm like, oh, he's worked with this actor more than once. If I see that, it's one of two things. Either they have a great working relationship and they're able to tell phenomenal stories because of that great working relationship, And there's something about the director's film or the actor's film that I connect with that I could certainly take away from that makes me want to look at what they've done outside of their works. In this case, more or less the conversations they've had about the said projects or whatever the case may be. So I can see how I can connect with it. Because if I connect with them through their work, can I connect with them outside of their work as well too? So that's a lot of what I've gotten from Mark, in this case with Gary as well, Luke Albright, and then even with you. So having heard how you have seen you meant to say all the work you've done so far that I've come across here, and then seeing how you conduct yourself outside of that and hearing the various highs and lows throughout your life and how you've been able to sustain yourself and be able to keep yourself at an even keel because of the experience you've gone through. It's interesting for me to hear that, and then listening to Mark's story and how you guys were able to click like that and have a working relationship. And like I said before, in my opinion, I think Mark is giving you some of the best opportunities in terms of acting where you've done something that you don't necessarily do often. And for him to give you that opportunity and hearing how you guys have been able to click, and you talked about you guys have the same common interest where you both love monster films, but it's not the monster characters you love, but it's the complexity behind the characters that you guys are really attached to that makes you understand why they turned out the way they did and that they weren't necessarily the bad guys, but the circumstances made them that way. And you guys tell stories under those same lenses, if you will, too, especially when we talk about films like Dress to Kill and Painkiller. And I'm also very interested in checking out Kill Crab, which sounds like to me is to be one of Mark's most epic films to date so far. So I'm really curious to see how that turns out, especially after learning about what Circus of Dread is all about. And I'm learning how that film hopefully will come to fruition as well, too, because I don't think you guys ever shot the film just yet. If I'm at this point right now, is that correct?
So too. Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm hoping as well, too, from how he describes it to me. But that film, he says that it's something that is definitely a very epic film for the reasons why he delved into that here. But it wasn't necessarily about how cool the story sounded, but it's really the more dark complexities about the brothers that was really the most interesting aspect about the relationship of the character stories that I found really appealing.
It's the film that I want to do before I die.
Well, that's the film he's also been wanting. He's trying to do for quite some time, because I think he's talked about this movie since 2017, if I recall correctly. So it's been a while since he talked about the film. So I hope it does come to fruition. But so basically, what I'm trying to say is that I was looking forward to this conversation because I was really curious to hear about the areas that I thought were the most interesting about you, where you talked about aspects of your faith and how that partakes in your decision-making process, which is something I don't think a lot of people have even asked about, but I was curious about, because if it's something that's very important in your life, how does that factor in with your decision-making and the roles you take on, especially when it's a role that's very controversial for a lot of people who are of the faith that may say that's not the right thing to do. But then again, you brought your reasons for how you conduct yourself and why you do so. That to me is the most interesting part, because I think that's where I get to learn more about you as the person, not from the person that made a decision to take a paycheck for a movie because I get to work with the director X, Y, and Z. So I'm really curious. I'm more interested in learning about how that thought process is like for you, because I'm hoping that in the next upcoming project you take on here, the next director you work with here, there's got to be a reason for why you want to work with that director, especially if one I've never heard of before. And I'm curious what it is about their project that you connected with for you to say yes to that director. Because I'm sure you're not going to say yes to a director for a great story, but maybe the relationship wasn't all that great. So there's a lot of different areas that has to factor in for you to say yes to everything before you commit to that here. So it sounds like to me you take your time to delve into that before you commit to it, among other things that factor in for that as well. So I'm very grateful that you've given me the time to speak with me on this here and to answer my questions, because these were things that I was most interested in here. And I'm very thankful that you've given me the time to answer those questions and to really give me more insight about who you are as a person through those processes, and also understand the decision-making process as far as why you make those decisions in the first place, to understand why the project you take on here was so important for you to begin with here. So I don't mean to repeat myself again about that here, but this is me essentially giving your flowers here, because I think you've lived a very interesting life where some people do take certain things for granted about the amount of work that it takes for an artist to fall through this endeavors, which is not a very easy path. But you're actually one of the very lucky ones who's been able to sustain a pretty long career, which is not a very common thing. And I think some people take that for granted. And if someone were to say, the guy that worked on this horror movie, they may be dismissive about it, but I think they tend to overlook the fact that you've worked on several other projects here. But the real question is how he's been able to sustain that and still maintain a career that most people wish they could have, doing what they love and actually get paid to do it, and respect the process along the way as well too. So that to me is more important to understand and want people to be educated on, rather than he took on a film that I didn't like, so the movie sucks and I don't care about the actor. But there's more to the story behind that, and I think that's the most important thing to understand why they do so here. Which then, when you see what the next project they've worked on, probably makes more sense why they took it on, rather than make the assumption why they should have taken it on, whatever the case may be. I'm rambling on there, but if there's anything you want to say in closing here about what people could be expecting here, because by the time this episode gets uploaded, it'll be sometime next week as of this recording. So I'm curious to see if there's anything that maybe has already been in the process that could be mentioned here that people can be lookout for, that they could be expecting to check you out in, whether it be film, television, or whatever the case may be, that you're able to indulge and share with us here.
Yeah, I've got a part on an ABC series. It's just a small part in one episode, and I think it'll air in December. But I don't think I'm supposed to say what the series is because they have a non-disclosure. But I'll mention it on social media when it happens. But something I really like I should encourage people to do, especially as the nights are getting darker and days are getting shorter, is to check out my podcast.
Oh, I listened to that before. Yeah, I listened to it. It's like about 20 minutes each episode here. Yeah.
Yeah, Gothic Good Night. And I think they're like 15 episodes. I just do them occasionally as the mood strikes me. I got another one I'm going to work on soon. But it's short bedtime fiction. Yeah. And so it's designed to put you to sleep. That's the whole point. So sometimes I hear from people who say, like, I can't listen to an episode without falling asleep. And like, that's great, because that's exactly what I wanted. It's not your typical podcast of a guy rambling on. Like, I really do want to relax you in a dark way for the evening. So I'd encourage people to check it out. It's called Gothic Good Night, and it's on all the podcast apps. I don't make any money off of it. I just do it because I'm passionate about it, because I like the idea of closing your eyes and being in the dark and listening to some dark voice telling you that all of humanity is in the dark in some way, and then telling you a story about it. I find that relaxing. Like, it really helps me sleep because it feels truthful. Like, for me, truth is better than any sleeping pill. So I try to be truthful in the podcast about what humanity is. And yeah, maybe people would enjoy it. So they can check out Gothic Good Night.
And I think the last episode you uploaded was back in April this year. So it's been a while since you did an episode. So is this something you do whenever you have the time to do it here, or how
I do it when I have it. It takes about a week to do one of the episodes because I edit them so meticulously. Yeah. My goal is for the heart rate to go down a little bit as the episode goes on. So I really have to work out the pacing and whatnot. And I've got to find a story that fits the time frame, because I always want to keep it under 30 minutes. So yeah, I got an idea for another one, but I do them slowly. Like, I'm not concerned with putting out an episode every week or anything like that. I just do them when I want to do them, when I feel it, and people can just, subscribe. And when a new one comes, they'll be like, ooh, I'm going to check that out and go to sleep.
All right. Well, for the cameras again, Bill, I want to say thank you so much for giving me the time, and I'll make sure to have all the description in description below to have people to be lookout for what they can check you out on your social media platform. But otherwise, I want to say thank you again. This was a great conversation. I would love to have another one here with you like this again, especially for an upcoming project you have coming down the pipeline here. I would love to help promote as well too. But otherwise, for the cameras, I want to say thank you, and until next time, cheers.
And I want to say thank you for a real conversation. You're good people. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.